we have got a massive surprise for you coming up. Later on in the show, we'll be bringing you a first look at all of the front pages. But before anything else, we've got an exclusive look at the Sun's front page. And today, they've got a big headline. Putin has tried to kill me 5 times. It's an interview Jerome Starkey has done, his defense editor of The Sun, of course. He's with Volodymyr Zelensky, and he's saying that the war in the Middle East has kind of drawn international attention away from the war in Ukraine. And Putin has tried to kill me 5 times, just part of that interview. Now, what he's trying to do is make a desperate plea to say we're at a critical juncture in Ukraine, and in a world exclusive interview with Jerome Starkey, basically, President Zelensky is saying, look, just do not forget that we are here. And here's what he had to say.
I think not less 5, 6, not less. Interesting, the last information that there is the plan, which I shared with you out of the camps that that's at the beginning of our meeting that they want very much, and the name of operation is Maidan 3. It means to change the president. Maybe it's not by killing. I mean, it's changing. They will use any instruments they have.
I'm delighted to say Jerome joins me now from Krakow in Poland. Jerome, firstly, thanks for staying up so late for us tonight. I know it's pretty late where you are. What can you tell us about how this all happened? Putin has tried to kill me 5 times, quite a headline. What is the mood in the place where Volodymyr Zelensky is?
Well, the mood is pretty business as usual, to be honest. I mean, we met him inside his office in central Kyiv. It was the first time I'd been inside. It's very, as you'd expect, a very heavily guarded, defended compound, although quite low-key from the outside. The security, when you get there, very intense. I mean, when we went in to meet him, we had to surrender everything, including our pens, as we went through various layers of sort of airport-style security. The message from Volodymyr Zelensky, as you sort of hinted at, he's concerned that the world's attention has moved away from Ukraine and understandably onto Israel, given what has happened last month. But he believes that plays into Russia's hands. He believes that Russia may even have had a hand in supporting, enabling, or at least encouraging somehow Hamas or Hamas's supporters, be that Iran. Russia has an important military relationship with Iran, a relationship that's grown increasingly important during the course of the war in Ukraine, because Iran has supplied hundreds of Shahed kamikaze one-way drones, which have been increasingly used to hit Ukraine's infrastructure. So there's a lot going on. Understandably, President Zelensky is approaching sort of 2-year anniversary. In February next year, we'll mark 2 years since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And whilst the first year we saw, the horror and violence of the invasion, and we then witnessed really over that first year the astonishing Ukrainian resistance. We saw the retreat from Kyiv, the Russian retreat from Kharkiv in the northeast, and then about this time last year we saw the retreat from Kherson in the south. But over the next 12 months, over the second year more or less of that war, Ukraine's progress has been slower, and President Zelensky acknowledged that. He acknowledged that progress on land, on the battlefield, had not been as fast as he would have liked. But he pointed to the fact that progress at sea, progress in the Black Sea, had been significant. And in fact, Russia's Black Sea fleet had been forced to retreat eastwards. But he's acutely aware, I think, from this conversation, the lack of progress on land, the counteroffensive, the much vaunted counteroffensive, had failed to take as much ground as he had hoped, as many of Ukraine's backers had hoped. And indeed, that has perhaps eroded, to some extent undermined, to some extent the confidence of some of Ukraine's allies as to whether or not Ukraine can indeed expel Russia from its territory. That remains President Zelensky's stated ambition for this conflict. He wants to push Russia back. He wants to reclaim Ukraine's 1991 independence borders. Now, Britain has said it will continue to support Ukraine as long as it takes to defeat Russia. Ostensibly, many other allies have said the same. But what we've seen in America, for example, in recent weeks is that cabal of Republicans are concerned that the war in Ukraine is, in their words, a sort of never-ending conflict, a never-ending stalemate, and they're reluctant. In fact, they've managed to block a White House attempt to send $60 billion of aid, of military aid, to Ukraine. And of course, that's a huge concern to Ukraine. Now, these are the machinations of politics. The money, most people, most experts on this believe the money will make it there eventually. But nonetheless, the symbol that such a holdup in Congress sends to Ukraine, sends to the people who are fighting on the front lines, is clearly very, very worrying. And that concern has filtered through. They've heard that loud and clear. So there's concern in Ukraine over the long-term support for their conflict. President Zelensky makes the point. He believes they are fighting for shared common values with the United States, with the United Kingdom, fighting for values like freedom and democracy against what they see as the oppression of Vladimir Putin's Russia. And one of the things that Zelensky said to us yesterday was that, if at the moment it is Ukrainian men and women who are paying a price with their lives, they're paying, they are paying a blood cost to this conflict. So for all Ukraine's donors, that is coming in terms of, cash donations in humanitarian aid, donations in military aid or materiel. Zelensky's message is that if his country is not successful, then he believes the war will spread to NATO territory, and it's only a matter of time if Ukraine falls before Russia finds itself fighting toe-to-toe with NATO soldiers on NATO soil.
Yeah, and that must be particularly sort of felt where you are now in Poland, which is obviously just over the border from the western side of Ukraine.
Absolutely. What's interesting, though, of course, is that the relationship between Ukraine and Poland has not been entirely straightforward over the course of the last 21 months. Initially, and indeed sort of systemically, Poland has been one of Ukraine's staunchest and most loyal allies. We've seen that on two fronts, both in terms of the amount of refugees from Ukraine who have come here to Poland, and we've also seen it in terms of the amount of military aid that Poland supplied, particularly early on. I'm sure your viewers, Mike, will remember perhaps when Britain sent Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. We sent a squadron's worth. There was a lot of debate about whether the Germans were going to allow the Leopard 2s to be sent to Ukraine. But in fact, before all of that, while those arguments were going back and forth, Poland was just getting on with it. Poland had a huge stockpile of Soviet-era armor, the T-72 Russian-designed tanks that Ukraine also used. Poland had them in its armory, and they handed them over to Ukraine because, crucially, Ukraine soldiers could use them straight away. They were familiar with them. They didn't need to train on them. They knew these vehicles. They knew how to fight them. They knew how to service them, how to maintain them, how to get them into battle. And so that support quickly from Poland has been absolutely key. But unfortunately, the relationship has soured slightly because of claims in Poland, a feeling in Poland that Ukraine has been dumping its grain exports here. It's a complicated sort of trade dynamic, but because Russia closed the Black Sea, or at least severely limited what Ukraine could export via the Black Sea, most of Ukraine's grain exports for a long period of time came out over land, and they came out into neighboring countries like Poland. And that, wherever that grain was ultimately intended for, it had a knock-on effect on the neighboring markets. And Polish farmers felt that Ukraine was dumping its products here, that grain prices were falling, Polish farmers were paying the price, and that creates a sort of domestic political backlash here. So, Ukraine is fighting for its survival in the midst of an incredibly complicated web of competing and complicated political alliances. We've got the relationship between neighbors. We've seen Slovakia, for example, recently cancel £43 million worth of planned military aid to Ukraine because there's been a change of government there. The new left-leaning government has decided that it does not want to support Ukraine's war effort. It said that people in Slovakia have more important problems, and the new prime minister, has said that he thinks the EU should play the role of peacemaker rather than arms dealer. Of course, the majority of nations in the EU see their role as defenders of Ukraine against an aggressive and belligerent Russia.
Yes, indeed. Jerome, good to talk to you. Thank you so much again.